But first of all, we will start by going into the future, and unfortunately a decommitment from one of the very best in the nation.
Yeah, so I think, Mark, this was something that the Oklahoma coaching staff and some people thought was happening, for a couple of weeks, and it was made official this week. One of the Oklahoma's best commitments for the 2022 class, Luther Burden, wide receiver out of Missouri, had officially decommitted to Oklahoma. So, like I said, this was something that I think the coaching staff was aware of over the last couple of weeks that could be incoming pretty quickly. And like I said, the announcement came this week. So, I think on one hand, it's a little concerning, understanding that Oklahoma has lost three top 100 wide receivers over the course of this 2020 cycle here through the spring, through the summer. So I think that's concerning from that respect. But I think you also have to have a little bit of faith in the coaching staff and a little bit of faith in Lincoln Riley. They've never really struggled to get wide receiver talent in. So now if you're looking at this and Oklahoma's lost a 5-star defensive lineman or a linebacker or maybe even a quarterback, maybe that's something that's a little bit more concerning. But I think the first year that Oklahoma struggles massively at talent at the wide receiver position, and then that will be news at that point. So right now, yes, it's a hit. Yes, I think Oklahoma has to go back to the drawing board a little bit. But Lincoln Riley talked a little bit about this and the change, really kind of the paradigm shift in recruiting. Mark, just kind of moving forward on how not only Oklahoma but a lot of these teams navigate recruiting with NIL and then with COVID in terms of having some of those rosters a little bit higher than what you would expect in a year. So Oklahoma's been very successful about getting some wide receivers through the portal, specifically Mike Woods this year. So I think Oklahoma, not great position, but I think it's not a time to panic if you're an Oklahoma fan looking at the trend of wide receiver decommits. And I think one of the things, NIL is going to be such a big part of recruiting these days. Oklahoma has had one wide receiver decommit, go to SMU, really because he felt like he had a stronger brand earning potential in the Dallas area where he's from versus going to Oklahoma. And really, kind of the same thing here. You can lead because I think Missouri is one of the leaders right now for his services after the decommitment local. So I think some of these kids have the mindset when they're thinking about recruiting to a team. It's not necessarily just an individual coach or an individual program. I think part of their decision making now is understanding what is my, as new and as maybe awkward and uncomfortable it is to talk about, some of these kids are talking about what is their earning potential at a school like Oklahoma, whereas like that they're known in the state of Missouri and maybe that locally in Missouri they feel like that they can maybe earn a lot more from an NIL perspective. So I think it'll be interesting not only how Oklahoma rebounds for this on the wide receiver front for 2022, but what that recruiting kind of looks like across the country.
I was a bit taken back, and I should not have been, when Quinn Ewers, the Ohio State commit and signee now, decided to skip his senior season. So that wasn't what surprised me. It was that he was very outspoken, and the reasons given, number one, NIL. He just stated it flat out. He didn't even try to massage it in any way. So it's a very real thing, and the players are so social media and worldly savvy than they would have been years ago that they're just going to make that a major part of the decision process. And of course, I'm speaking in generalities. It depends on the player and what their priorities are. Jason, did it seem with Luther Burden as though this decommitment was a situation where the relationship had better times and he's looking elsewhere exclusively, or where he's just opening up the commitment and Oklahoma's still very much in play?
Yeah, I think Oklahoma's still in play, Mark. I think he's just opening up the commitment. Certainly, I think there's other schools like Missouri and maybe Georgia's kind of in the loop now in terms of what that looks like. But he's had a tremendous relationship with Dennis Simmons. He talked about that at length at his relationship that he's had with Dennis Simmons through this recruiting process. Still views him as not only maybe kind of a mentor, but a good friend that he's been able to trust and talk to. And I think one of the things, if Georgia gets into the mix, it's how do I put this? It may be a a war that Oklahoma's not willing to get into from a recruiting perspective. In terms of, unfortunately, it could be something that just Oklahoma's not in a position to get into that with some of these schools. So I think the relationship's still solid. I think the relationship, I think that's still open. Oklahoma's not going to quit pursuing him. Yeah, they're gonna move on to some other targets that they have that they may be cooled off on. And I think one of the things that it's hard to pinpoint a guy like Dennis Simmons, who has been really good since he's been to Oklahoma, on the recruiting trail. He's got several high-profile five-star wide receivers: Jaden Hazelwood, Theo Weiss, Trajan Bridges. Even though he's no longer with the program, he was really integral in getting some of those kids over to Oklahoma. So, but I think the one thing that Oklahoma has struggled with a little bit, they've bowed out in some of these races a little bit sooner than maybe they should have. Meaning, they got a pledge from. They've got these. At one time, they had 3 of the top 100 wide receivers in the country, and they've been in with some of these other kids, and they've kind of bowed out in some of those relationships and some of those recruiting. Just say, okay, we're moving on. We've got these guys. So I think Oklahoma may look at changing that strategy up a little bit, having a little bit too much trust in some of these 17, 18-year-old kids in terms of how solid their decisions are.